From the untamed wilderness to the freshwater shores of the greatest lakes, Michigan's Upper Peninsula is an outdoor lover's paradise and the country's best-kept secret. My name is Kristen Ojanimi, a lifelong Upper and the newest host of the iconic UP Outdoors television program, Discovering, and it's my honor to carry on the tradition of the best outdoor storytellers of this region. So sit back, listen, and discover what it's like to live and play in this amazing place we call the UP. Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Big Valley Ford, Dodge Chrysler Jeep in Ewan, Michigan, BAM Tools, Hardcore Outfitters of Iron Mountain, and Cooking Wild Seasonings. Welcome to the Discover the UP podcast. I'm Kristen Ojanimi. I just learned we have venomous rattlesnakes here in the UP. One of the reasons I claim this is the best place on earth is there aren't any poisonous snakes here. I've been lying to people, kind of. More on that in a bit. Last December was the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. Me being me, I like anniversaries. It's a good launch point for stories, so I wondered what species of animals, birds, reptiles, fish, in the UP are currently endangered, and what species do we see in the UP today that were once endangered, but now thankfully recovered. To learn more about the Endangered Species Act, what it is, why it began, why it's important, especially today, and some of those endangered and recovered species found up here in our favorite peninsula, I talked to Scott Hicks, the field supervisor here in Michigan for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Spoiler alert, the obvious animal that is on the federal endangered species list that is found up here in abundance is the gray wolf, of course. However, Scott could not talk about wolves other than to say they are on the list because of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service still being under litigation regarding wolves. Here's Scott.
Hi there, this is Scott Hicks. I'm the field supervisor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Ecological Services Program Office here in Michigan. The Ecological Services Program includes a variety of different things. One of those things is the Endangered Species Act implementation within the state of Michigan. So I work with the biologists in our office on endangered species and other topics like environmental contaminants and implementing a whole host of federal wildlife laws. So the U.S. Endangered Species Act is a federal law that provides protections for species that are listed as threatened or endangered. Basically, the Endangered Species Act does a lot of different things, and listing species and recovery of species is one key aspect, but it also includes a section that's specifically dedicated to cooperation with state agencies. It has another section that's specifically dedicated to cooperation among federal agencies. And as I mentioned in the purposes as defined by Congress, it also helps to implement international treaties that help to regulate the trade in wildlife and control international wildlife smuggling and things like that. Some of the important aspects of the Endangered Species Act, are the cooperation that happens across, whether it's working with state agencies or tribes or non-governmental entities, private conservation organizations. And the Endangered Species Act was passed in December of 28th of 1973. So we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of it. And I think it's really important to note that that was a time when there was a lot of environmental concerns raised. There were a number of environmental laws that passed around that period of time. And I think it was a recognition that, when we lose a species, it's not just our loss, but it's a loss to all future generations. And it was a recognition that we could do better. And, today species are facing a variety of threats, and the law is probably more important than ever in terms of conservation. It's been effective at preventing the extinction of most species that have been ever listed at the federal level. And, recovery of species and getting them taken off the list is a challenging process. It takes a lot of work and resources, and it's something we and our partners are continually working at. But the Endangered Species Act has been a very, very important law and remains so today.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings.
Cooking Wild Seasonings. Flavor and meat. Just mix, heat, and eat. That simple? You bet. Now even easier with our new grab-and-go 4-pack cartons. 4 combinations to choose from. Whitetail Hunter, Deer Camp, Summer Sausage, and Fresh Sausage. Make it fresh, make it yours. Make it easy. Grab a 4-pack today. Available at various locations, including all Chris Northwood's neighborhood store locations. Find out more about Cooking Wild Seasonings at cookingwildseasonings.com.
There's a couple of reasons why it's really important to save imperiled species. First, again, I think it is important from the perspective of future generations and giving them the opportunity to see and experience these species. But it's also important from the perspective of, all species live in complex relationships with other species. So as we lose species, it affects other species. And a simple example of that would be when you think about like a plant and the flowers and the pollinators that pollinate the flower. It's a mutually beneficial relationship where the plants are getting their flowers pollinated, and that's required for reproduction. The pollinators are getting the food that they need to survive. So when you lose a species, it affects things like that. So that's one reason it's important to save imperiled species. Another reason it's important is the Endangered Species Program, in some ways, to me, is sort of analogous to what you might think of as like the space program. The space program, we all don't get to experience it directly, but we may benefit from the technology advances that come with the challenges of space travel. Well, endangered species conservation can be particularly challenging. And what we learn from that can help us save other species, and even better, sometimes it can help us prevent species from further declines and help conserve them before they become imperiled. So there's that kind of learning that goes on through the endangered species programs. And then the last point I'll highlight is one that when you do something to benefit imperiled species, threatened and endangered species, those are species that are often facing a variety of threats. There's a variety of things that are probably contributing to why they're imperiled. And when you work on those problems, many other species can benefit from that. Sometimes a whole community of organisms, plants and animals, will benefit from addressing those threats. So it can have direct benefits, not just to the one species we're focused on, but the whole suite of species that might depend on a Great Lakes coastline or something, that particular habitat that species occurs in. And just to give you like an example of that with a Michigan example, back when the Kirtland's Warbler was listed under the Endangered Species Act, that species, as part of the cooperation required under the Endangered Species Act, there was what's called a consultation process that occurred for that species related to communication towers. So the tall towers that have guy wires and lighting to warn pilots. Because it turns out that songbirds that migrate at night are often impacted by those communication towers. They get disorientated around the lighting, and then they can collide with the guy wires. So Kirtland's Warbler are a night migrating bird, like many of our songbirds. And through that consultation process, there were studies done here in Michigan that looked at the lighting that occurs on the towers and what kind of lighting would be safe for pilots, but would also reduce the attraction for birds. And they came up with lighting scenarios that have led to new standards for lighting communication towers. And those new standards are now saving hundreds of thousands of birds every year, each spring and fall as they migrate across North America. So that's just like one example of how by benefiting the Kirtland's Warbler, it actually benefited many, many, many species of birds and continues to do so today.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by BAM Tools. My friend Andrew wants to help support this podcast, but didn't know how he should advertise his business, so here goes. BAM Tools is a small, family-owned and operated business out of Ewan, Michigan, but they cover the entire UP, delivering tools to all sorts of businesses. Inside the tool truck are hand tools, power tools, automotive shop supplies, and so much more. I should tell Andrew I need a new Grizzly cooler, preferably blue. BAM Tools is also a tech tire supplies distributor, and Travis is the guy behind the wheel of that truck. So if you see Andrew or Travis in a BAM Tools truck, tell them thanks for supporting this podcast.
And what's that process? I mean, for adding and removing species, I imagine it's a lot of work, it's a lot of boots on the ground, but you can kind of just give an overview of that.
Yeah, well, the process all starts with a review of the information. And that process, that review can be started either internally within the agency, or there is also the law established a petition process where people outside the agency can petition the service to take an action under the Endangered Species Act. So again, a petition is just kind of a formal request to take an action and provide supporting information. So the process of taking an action under the Endangered Species Act can either be started internally or through a petition from outside the agency. And as we move through this review process, there's certain stages or findings that we're required to make. An initial finding we make is just whether there's substantial information. So if we're looking at a petition, we're looking to see if the petition and the information supporting it provided substantial information. And then the process can, if it does, or if our internal processes do, then we would conduct a status review. And that status review is really an attempt to not just look at what was in the petition or what's in our files, but to go out and try and find all the available information, the best available information. And the information that we use is built upon the information collected by state agencies. It's built on information collected by scientists at universities, by private organizations, by the public. So it's really the standard under the Endangered Species Act for taking actions is using the best available information. And that information can be things like the population numbers or survey information or potential threats and the progression of threats and that type of thing. So once we get to the point where we're doing a status review, one of the things that we'll do is prepare something that we call a species status assessment. And this is kind of just an analysis framework of trying to analyze the biological information in a really rigorous way of looking at the viability of the species today and into the future, because the Endangered Species Act requires us to look into the future and think about and make decisions about what we think is in store for species, looking at the threats that it's facing now and in the foreseeable future. So that species status assessment, again, it's something that is done collaboratively. It uses information from all sources. And again, throughout this petition review process, there's public comment periods. So there's opportunities for people to provide information. And ultimately, if it looks like listing of the species may be warranted, then we would do a proposed rule in the Federal Register. And if it is, then we would issue a final rule in the Federal Register, and then a certain amount of time after the final rule, the listing would go into effect and the species would go on the list. Or if the species were coming off the list, then it would be removed from the list at the time of that final rule.
I was just about to ask, so the delisting process is probably basically the same, just kind of.
Right, exactly. It's the inverse of the listing process. It's evaluation of the threats, comparing it against, considering the current condition and projected future conditions, and evaluating those against the definitions of threatened and endangered.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Big Valley Ford, Dodge Chrysler Jeep in Ewan, Michigan. When I'm traveling around the UP, I'm surprised and not surprised by how often the vehicle in front of me has a Big Valley sticker on it. Big Valley Ford Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram is located in the tiny town of Ewan on the west end of the Upper Peninsula. People from across the region buy their new and used cars and trucks from Big Valley, and they drive all the way back to Ewan to get them serviced. Which reminds me, I'm probably due for an oil change myself. I'm on my 4th new Ford vehicle with over 500,000 miles under their tires, so I'm probably due for a tire rotation too. Big Valley is a one-stop shop for all your vehicle needs with a full service department, parts department, and body shop. I got caught in a hailstorm once with my last truck, and they made it look just like new. If you're looking for a new or used vehicle, go see them in Ewan or check out their inventory online at bigvalley.biz.
But yeah, if we just kind of want to go into then that the species that are native to the Upper Peninsula, over the 50 years since the act that have been added to the list as endangered or threatened, and those that have since recovered and been able to come off that list.
Yeah, so I think everyone who appreciates wildlife and nature recognizes that the UP is a special place, and endangered and threatened species are no different, right? The UP is currently home to 15 endangered and threatened species. Some of those species in the UP, it's where they have their best remaining populations. Others of those species, they're only occasionally found in the UP. Just for a couple of examples, the pitcher's thistle is a plant species that's only found associated with the Great Lakes dune systems. So in some parts of the Great Lakes, those dune systems are in a lot of trouble, whether from development or whatever, and the populations are not particularly strong. In the UP, some of those dune systems are doing really well. They're, the intact ecosystem, intact landscapes, lots of conservation-focused lands, and those populations can include, several thousands of individuals. So that's just an example of a species where the UP is a really important place for the conservation of the species. Another example would be of a species that might only occasionally be found in the UP would be the Canadian lynx, another threatened species. So a Canadian lynx will wander into the UP every couple of years, every few years. In the UP, we have 5 listed plant species. There's the pitcher's thistle, which I mentioned, the dwarf lake iris, the Houghton's goldenrod, and those 2 species, like pitcher's thistle, are associated with the Great Lakes shorelines. A little bit different habitats than the pitcher's thistle, but other listed plants include the lakeside daisy, the Michigan monkey flower, and the Michigan monkey flower. The Michigan monkey flower is a species only found in Michigan. The dwarf lake iris is a species, I believe it's our state wildflower. It's a really beautiful little plant. Again, most of the best populations are found in Michigan. The mammals, we have 3 listed mammals that occur in the UP. The Canadian lynx I mentioned, gray wolf, and the northern long-eared bat. We also have 3 birds listed that are either regularly found or occasionally found or rarely found in the UP. The one that is regularly occurs in the UP is the endangered piping plover. Another shore bird that is listed is called the red knot. And that species is also is more passing through Michigan on its way to its breeding grounds from its wintering grounds. And unlike the plover, which breeds here in Michigan. And the other one that there's a few records anyway of in the UP is the whooping crane. There was an experimental population designated under the Endangered Species Act to restore the whooping crane to kind of the eastern part of the United States, and occasionally individuals from that population show up in the UP. The others include an insect species, the Heinz emerald dragonfly. And then there is one reptile that depends on whether you include Boblo Island as part of the UP. If you do, that is a place where the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake occurs, and it's a stronghold for that snake. So that would be the only place if you consider that the UP, that would be included there.
I'm just going to pause Scott and jump in to clarify where he is talking about. Boblo Island is what Michiganders call Bois Blanc Island, which is located just east of Mackinac Island. I looked it up, and Boblo is considered part of the UP and is within Mackinac County. and it is quite remote and forested and perfect for a discovering, hiking, or camping story, minus the fact that it is a haven for these poisonous Massasauga rattlesnakes. So don't expect a story on that island from me. I do feel bad, though, that the snakes are on the threatened list because of habitat loss and being killed because of human fear, so I am glad they do have a home somewhere, but I would rather hike through the swamps of Seney during mosquito season again any day than visit their home on Pablo Island. I did just read, though, that the Massasauga rattler is a shy snake and prefers to flee from enemies and will only bite when threatened. So, maybe if someone paid me lots of money to camp on Pablo, I would go do the story. I used to be afraid of bats, and when white nose syndrome came through and killed off most of our little brown bat population, making them threatened here in the state, I had to go into one of the old mines with the DNR for a story. There were less than 20 bats still alive in that cave when there should have been hundreds. And I felt so sad for these bats, and watching them just dying on the walls of the mine that day just gave me a completely different outlook on bats, where I am no longer afraid of them. So maybe the same would happen with snakes. Maybe. Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Hardcore Outfitters of Iron Mountain. Hardcore Outfitters strives to promote and instill an enjoyment of the outdoors for all ages and individuals. Whether you're already an avid outdoors person who enjoys the thrill of the hunt, or newly learning the art of archery, sharpen your skills at their indoor archery range and check out their line of products from Matthews, Hoyt, Bear, Raven, Centerpoint, 10-Point, and Wicked Ridge. If being on the water drives your passion and has you hooked, they have an impressive selection of year-round fishing gear, plus a full-service bait shop and the largest selection for fly fishing the UP. Go to Hardcore Outfitters in Iron Mountain, tell them I sent you, and discover what outdoor hobby or adventure awaits you.
So we talked about there's the 15 that are currently threatened or endangered. Besides the Kirtland warbler, is there any that you can think of, like on the top of your head, that have also recovered in the Upper Peninsula that were once on the endangered species list?
Another good example would be the bald eagle. At the time the Endangered Species Act was enacted, the bald eagle in Michigan had, around maybe 80 pairs of bald eagle total for the state of Michigan. And basically people worked to address the threats affecting the nest success of that species and help protect the birds that were nesting. And a result of that work and research on the issues facing the species, the population really rebounded. And, now I think we have something over 700 or 800 nesting pairs of bald eagles in Michigan. And they were delisted in 2007, and they're doing very well still today.
But yeah, is there anything else, Scott, that you'd like to add?
Well, Kristen, I appreciate the chance. And I really do enjoy the Discovering show. I think you guys do a great job with that. And I guess what I would add is just, the Endangered Species Act, there's a lot of, it can be controversial and it can be challenging. And I think that, it's one of those things where when you think about the difference it makes, and what it means for the future, to me, it remains one of the world's most important conservation laws. I think we talked about how it provides, it has specific provisions related to cooperation with state agencies and cooperation with federal agencies and working with tribes and how it, I don't know if I mentioned also too, but as part of the Endangered Species Program, there's a variety of grant programs. And, when you think about the Endangered Species Act, in my mind, what I think about is, it's one of those things where whether it's helping conserve species here in the United States or it's helping address, international conservation issues, this is a really important law and it's making a real difference. And I think, for people who appreciate the UP and nature. I think that what makes the UP special is something that I think, is something kind of what they were hoping to achieve with the Endangered Species Act. It's about conserving ecosystems and keeping the landscape in good health. And I think that's something that everyone, who appreciates the UP would also appreciate too.
I don't know how much time we have, but if we can go a little bit over, why did you pick this as a career? Why are you invested in the Endangered Species Act, and why do you do it?
Yeah, for me, it's a couple of things. One, I grew up enjoying the outdoors and fishing and hunting and biology in school. And so that was something that always had my interests. I think what I find most rewarding about endangered species work in particular is when I think about species we've lost, and we've lost species from Michigan. You think about like the passenger pigeon, or there was a small mollusk that was lost from Marquette County. I mean, we have lost our species in Michigan or nationally, thinking about species we've lost. I think about the opportunities that, we don't have because those species are gone. And I really feel strongly that it's important to try and leave future generations with opportunities that we've had, as many as we can. Give them the opportunity to try and save species and recover species. And we're at a time where there's lots of conservation challenges, whether it's, habitat loss or, the potential for climate changing. There are a lot of challenges, invasive species. I mean, just many, many things. And so for me, I think it feels like when I come into work, I'm working on things that matter. And I feel like it matters for future generations. And it matters, my kids love the outdoors. And as we started the conversation, I was mentioning to you the trip my daughter and I had in the UP. And, it matters to me that, I'm hopefully giving future generations additional opportunities, and they're not having other losses like the things that we don't have.
Thank you, Scott, for chatting with me. As I'm talking right now, I can see 2 bald eagles outside my window, which is really not uncommon for me at all. We went ice fishing the other night, and there's a pile of fish guts at the edge of my yard, so that's why. And there have been close to a dozen eagles here at one time. They have definitely made a comeback. I remember when I was a kid, it was rare actually to see an eagle. Even when I bought my first digital camera in the early 2000s, I remember taking what I thought was a great close-up photo of a bald eagle sitting on a fence alongside the road, and I was amazed at how close I was to it. I realized later it was probably protecting some roadkill or had eaten too much and probably couldn't fly off at that moment. I will also have a story on discovering about endangered and recovered species found here in the UP, and should have that done in a couple of weeks. As I started this story, I learned there is both a federal endangered species list and there is a state list. Michigan's state endangered species law was enacted in 1974, so just shortly after the federal act. So they're also celebrating 50 years this year. For the discovering story, we will also talk about some of those species found in the UP that are on the state list as well. And I chatted with a few DNR wildlife biologists about those species, like the piping plover, bats, bald eagles, falcons, lynx, and more. So watch for that in the near future. And thanks for listening. And